Alan Dershowitz believed he could embarrass Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett on TV by ridiculing her law degree. What the Texas Democrat did next left the Harvard legend speechless and potentially left the legal establishment's greatest blind spot laid bare forever. But what if this was more than just a moment of one debate? What if it altered the way we perceive law and politics forever? The lights of the CNN studios burned hot as two legal giants went head-to-head in what would be the most combustible political showdown of the year. In one corner, the professor whose surname has become as iconic as Harvard Law School. Opposite him, a rising star, a searing legal brain who embodies a new generation of political fighters. To his right sat Alan Dershowitz, 85 years old, professor emeritus at Harvard Law School, celebrity and controversial figure defender for more than half a century. His gray suit immaculately pressed, his swagger oozing as if he owned the place. Across from him, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, 43, civil rights lawyer turned Texas representative. Her purple blazer sharp, her eyes bright, and ready to fight. But would her on-the-job experience stand up to one of the brightest legal minds of our era? This was not going to be a nice legal debate. In a matter of minutes, Dershowitz would unleash an attack that left the audience gasping for air, challenging not only Crockett's legal acumen, but even her credentials. He believed his Harvard credentials would intimidate this Dallas congresswoman. He was bitterly mistaken. Alan just committed an error that is going to ruin his reputation, a legal analyst who was observing from the green room whispered. He doesn't know what Jasmine Crockett is made of. The ensuing confrontation would be viral in minutes, rewriting America's perception of legal elitism and the next generation of black women leaders. Before we get to this amazing showdown, hit subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. You're going to see a moment in legal history that can change everything. There was a charged tension inside the CNN studio. Camera people zoomed in on both faces. Dershowitz, with his trademark smirk of academic superiority, and Crockett, with the focused intensity of a trial lawyer who had prepared for battle. You could feel the charged atmosphere, the anticipation was palpable. Anderson Cooper, a veteran of thousands of interviews, would later say this felt different from the moment it started. This wasn't just another panel discussion. This was the clash of two worlds. What came next would show that sometimes the student doesn't simply outdo the teacher, they totally destroy them on national TV. This was not about education. This was a masterclass in actual legal knowledge versus the hubris of elitism. To comprehend why this clash was so significant, you must know precisely who these two titans of the law actually are and why their collision is a seismic event in American politics and law. For over half a century, Alan Dershowitz has been the face of elite American legal education. Harvard Law School professor, author of dozens of books, defender of O.J. Simpson, Jeffrey Epstein, and Donald Trump. His resume reads like a who's who of controversial high-profile cases. But what happens when someone challenges a legend who has built their entire career on one unshakable belief, that his credentials make him untouchable? At 85, he's accustomed to being the brightest person in the room, the expert to whom everyone defers. Dershowitz established his reputation on constitutional law, civil rights, and an unshakable sense of his own intellectual superiority. He's been a guest on every news show of note, written op-eds for every major newspaper of note, and demanded respect, or at least consideration, from the legal community for decades. His Harvard pedigree opens every door. But now, there was a new generation questioning that very base. Recently, Dershowitz has not been doing well. His involvement with Jeffrey Epstein tarnished his image. His defense of Trump alienated many past supporters. Was this new tide of diverse, new voices finally the key to change? Some younger attorneys unabashedly wonder if his moment has passed, if his opinions signify an old-school establishment that must evolve. The question now, is it possible this old guard continues to wield their influence, or is the future of law really in a new generation's hands? Nevertheless, he conducted himself with the arrogance of a person who feels his Harvard background makes him above reprisal. But this evening, his arrogance would find its equal. Jasmine Crockett embodies all that the old legal elite is afraid of and does not comprehend. She was born and raised in St. Louis, and she paid her own way through college and law school without the privilege and contacts that characterize top legal cliques. She graduated from University of Houston Law Center, not an Ivy League school of law, but a good institution. That turns out lawyers who actually represent actual people. But the actual question is this: can the establishment really reject someone who has done more with her degree than most of them will ever do? Before she came to Congress, Crockett established herself as a civil rights lawyer in Dallas, fighting police brutality cases, protecting voting rights, and defending clients who couldn't pay for high-priced law firms. She is not merely an ex-lawyer, she is a fighter for justice. When she joined Congress in 2023, Crockett made headlines for her incisive questioning of witnesses at committee hearings, for cutting through political hogwash with legal acuity, and for refusing to back down from anyone, no matter how big their reputation or name. Her practical experience wasn't put on her resume, it was her combat-tested credibility. She's one of a new breed of black female leaders who bring legal acumen and political astuteness to the table and aren't afraid to confront the status quo. This was not just an argument, it was a declaration: experience and merit trump pedigree. But on television tonight on CNN, she was entering Dershowitz's domain. A television legal debate that nationally is more about academic degrees and institutionally respected backgrounds than actual world experience. Would this confrontation mark a huge cultural shift occurring throughout America? On the one hand, the old establishment, white male, Ivy League trained, and smug in their belief that their credentials and institutional ties entitle them to be the ultimate arbiters. On the other, a new generation of merit-based, experiential and community-connected leaders who are not afraid to challenge the status quo and take on the power structures that the establishment has up to now carefully cultivated. This was not merely a fight about law. It was a fight about power, perception, and the destiny of American leadership. The profession of law has been struggling to reconcile this conflict for decades. Law schools are getting more diverse, but the dominant power structures continue to be represented by graduates of a few top-tier institutions. What occurs when those previously silenced speak up to challenge the system? Young attorneys from state institutions and varied backgrounds are frequently forced to prove themselves to partners and judges who equate Ivy League with smart. Crockett's presence in Congress alone is a disruption to these expectations. Her capacity to penetrate the bunkum and call them on it was about to provide everyone viewing a clear reality check. She hadn't graduated from Harvard or Yale, but she'd shown herself to be more adept at questioning loppers than several of her peers who had. And now, as the cameras began to roll, millions would bear witness to just how much more potent experience can be than background. The setting was ripe for a clash of two significantly different visions of what American legal expertise is like. But who would ultimately prevail? Neither of them realized it yet, but this discussion would conclude with one reputation bolstered and another severely tarnished. Keep watching as we analyze what comes next in this explosive confrontation. But first, don't forget to subscribe, because you won't want to miss how this historic battle plays out. The type of profound constitutional analysis this case demands is derived from academic schooling and many years of serious research. But is that genuinely the sole means by which constitutional law may be understood? Because what came next would demonstrate that sometimes the greatest wisdom can't be found at the most elite schools. Cooper attempted to shift the conversation along, inquiring about precise legal precedents, but Dershowitz couldn't resist his preoccupation with ensuring intellectual superiority. And this was where he committed a fatal error, one that would haunt him for eternity. When Crockett gave a dissection of pertinent case law, referencing individual decisions and their ramifications, Dershowitz committed an error that would characterize the remainder of the evening. Congresswoman, you're referring to cases, which is acceptable, but do you have legal training so that you can truly grasp their constitutional import? I mean, where did you study law? Dershowitz, sure of his superiority, believed he had the ideal response, one that would quickly cement his academic superiority. But he didn't know how incorrect he was. The question was asked with that usual slightly smug grin, the scholarly equivalent of a pat on the head. He was certain that Crockett would collapse under the pressure of his Harvard background. He could not have been more wrong. Crockett stopped, the barest nod, recognizing the game he was playing. She had witnessed this routine before, the point at which someone with the highest credentials attempts to employ their prestige to belittle someone else's achievement. Typically, it occurred off-camera, in closed-door meetings or depositions. But not this time. This time it was being played out in front of an audience of millions, live on television. I studied at University of Houston Law Center, she replied, her voice calm and unwavering. Not Harvard, if that's what you're getting at. That was the moment the tide began to shift. The CNN studio went silent. Dershowitz's smile remained, but something had changed. The air in the room felt different. Ah, of course, that would account for the disparity in our analytic styles, Dershowitz replied, his voice laced with thinly concealed arrogance. Houston is a good regional school, I think, but constitutional law on this level really demands the level of intense indoctrination that you receive at the best schools. Harvard, Yale, schools that actually ready lawyers for tough constitutional issues. And that was when he crossed the line. The CNN studio descended into an unsettling silence. Cooper, picking up on the change, looked visibly uneasy. He felt it too. Dershowitz had just ventured into treacherous grounds. Even the crew seemed to stiffen. From a debate of law, this now was personal. Legal analysts around the country gawked. What Dershowitz had done was the absolute worst thing a legal analyst could do, attack the credentials of their opponent rather than their argument. And in doing so, He had revealed his own unabashed elitism. That was going to cost him everything. Professor Dershowitz, Crockett broke in, her voice now slicing through the tension. Are you implying that attorneys graduating from non-Ivy League institutions can't grasp constitutional law? I'm not implying anything, Dershowitz answered, his confidence still unshaken. I'm reporting a fact about differing levels of training and preparation. Constitutional scholarship demands a certain level of academic excellence that truthfully, most regional law schools simply can't offer. Crockett's eyes narrowed, and she sat forward. Her change of attitude was unmistakable. She was no longer just a politician. She was a force to be dealt with. Interesting, Professor, she said, her tone crisp, weighed down by years of legal experience. So, you're saying that where one attends law school tells you whether they can understand and apply constitutional principles? Dershowitz doubled back, failing to fall into the trap she had set for him. Experience counts, Congresswoman. Education pedigree counts. Quality of law school counts. These are not contentious things. They're just reality. Crockett wasn't having it. She rested back in her chair, her eyes unyielding. This would not be another cordial exchange. She was going to throw him for a loop in a way he never anticipated. Well then, Professor, she said, her voice heavy with calculated urgency. Let's test that theory. The gauntlet had been thrown out there, audacious and impossible to ignore. The entire CNN studio froze. Everyone in the room was aware that this was no ordinary debate. Something historic was about to be revealed. Legal experts, even those in law firms and law schools across America, leaned forward, hanging on every word. The internet exploded with anticipation. People everywhere could feel it. This was history in the making. Dershowitz, still riding high on his academic arrogance, smiled and nodded. By all means, Congresswoman, I'm always happy to engage in serious legal discussion. But what he did not know was that he had just signed his own death warrant. Crockett was on the verge of giving a judicial knockout punch that would keep lawyers' tongues wagging for years to come. Professor Dershowitz, Crockett started, her tone now carrying the gravitas of someone who had breathed and lived constitutional law in actual courtrooms. Given you think that academic background equals constitutional knowledge, let's have a look at the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause and how it applies to executive accountability. The room went even more silent. This was no skin-deep argument about theories. Crockett was going to make Dershowitz's whole career seem irrelevant. She hesitated, holding his gaze. You have argued in a number of recent interviews that presidential immunity should be construed expansively. But doesn't that view conflict directly with the Supreme Court's holding in Nixon versus Fitzgerald? Namely, the court's distinction between civil and criminal liability for presidential acts? Dershowitz shifted in his seat uneasily. The question was too specific, too intelligent, and most of all, too accurate. He had anticipated a softball, a political soundbite, but Crockett was attempting the intellectual throat-cutting. Well, Nixon versus Fitzgerald actually addressed specifically civil actions, he stuttered, attempting to get back on track. Right, Crockett stated, her stare shining with acuity. And that leads us to the even more applicable precedent in Clinton versus Jones, where the court actively dismissed sweeping assertions of presidential immunity from judicial process. The court on this point held that the president is not above the law, even when incumbent. The tension in the studio was intense. Crockett wasn't merely reciting cases. She was constructing a complex, multifaceted legal argument Dershowitz simply couldn't match. Let's dig deeper, as you appreciate tough analysis, she went on, unfazed. The Clinton court depended heavily upon Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company v. Sawyer. Justice Jackson's concurrence, which set the template for executive power analysis. Do you know Justice Jackson's 3 categories of presidential power? Dershowitz nodded, but his once confident grin was now all but forgotten. Crockett was playing a game he wasn't prepared for. Good, she said, almost taunting him. Then you'll recognize that under Justice Jackson's framework, when a president acts without constitutional or statutory authorization, like the evidence suggests in this case, presidential power is at its lowest ebb. Crockett was dominating the conversation now, and Dershowitz had nowhere to turn. Now, Professor, here's where my regional law school education and actual courtroom experience might be relevant, she said, her tone cutting through the room. I've litigated constitutional cases involving government accountability. I've argued in front of federal judges about executive overreach. I've seen how these principles apply when real people's rights are violated by government officials who think they're above the law. And that was the pivot. This wasn't about qualifications anymore. This was about reality. You can learn constitutional theory from Cambridge all you like, she told him, her tone vibrating with silent fury, but until you've argued in a federal courthouse that a police chief or a mayor can't take shelter behind qualified immunity when they're violating constitutional rights, you don't actually know what accountability is. Legal pundits observing from across the nation were jotting down furiously, aware that they were seeing a total disassembly of one legal icon by another. This was not another argument. It was the sort of moment that would alter how America perceived law, status, and actual authority forever. Dershowitz attempted to reply, his voice now trembling, his self-assurance in disarray. Constitutional interpretation evolves, he declared, but his statement no longer held the same authority as it did previously. Was it possible that at last the tide had turned against him? No, Professor, Crockett interjected bluntly, interrupting him in mid-sentence. Constitutional principles do not shift depending on who's covering your legal bills or which party occupies the White House. That's precisely the sort of unprincipled strategy that my regional law school education taught me to identify and reject. Bam! There it was, a forceful declaration that electrified the discussion, and more significantly, the legal community. She stared straight out at the camera, at the audience, with the assurance of one who had just established her point beyond question. The Constitution is not a Harvard seminar, she declared, where abstract theories are more important than actual consequences. It's a living document that shields real people from real abuses of power. The impact of her words lingered. It wasn't merely an argument, it was a pronouncement of the way law should be done. And then, with the poise of a seasoned litigator, she added, sometimes, the lawyers who understand the best are the ones who learned law by practicing it, not just by reading about it. What a mic drop moment. The whole CNN studio stopped dead in its tracks. It wasn't a debate anymore. Crockett had flipped the whole legal discussion on its side. Dershowitz, who had once stood tall among legal academics, was now fidgeting uncomfortably in his seat. His intellectual superiority attempts were left in tatters by a person he had previously thought was beneath him. Anderson Cooper, being the consummate professional, attempted to get the discussion back on track, but it was too late. Dershowitz sat in his seat as a man professionally eviscerated on live television. His intellectual condescension had been revealed, his hypocrisy laid bare, and his upper-class assumptions completely dismantled. All of this at the hands of a woman whose qualifications he had initially treated as second-rate. But the effect of what had occurred extended far beyond this single moment. What Crockett had accomplished wasn't a one-debate win. It was a sea change, a change that would ripple through legal communities, courtrooms, and political forums for years to come. The initial tweet came well under 30 seconds after the segment concluded. A Georgetown law professor wrote, "Did Jasmine Crockett just have the worst takedown in legal television history?" That was not a debate. That was a clinic in actual legal acumen versus university hubris. In 5 minutes, it was trending everywhere. Hashtag Crockett destroys Dershowitz-dominated X. Formerly Twitter, with legal experts, law students, and political pundits posting clips quicker than CNN's social media team could upload them. The viral moment? The time Crockett quoted Dershowitz's own 1982 article back at him. That 15-second clip would go on to be watched more than 2 million times in the first hour alone, setting the internet ablaze. At Legal Eagle, a well-liked lawyer YouTuber with more than 3 million subscribers, uploaded, "Holy. Jasmine Crockett just applied Alan Dershowitz's own scholarship to refute his hypocrisy on national TV. This is what happens when actual trial lawyers run into academic blowhards." Law students all over America started making memes. The most trending one featured Dershowitz's stunned face with the title, "When you learn that regional law schools teach constitutional law, too." But the social media furor was dwarfed by the earthquake occurring in professional legal communities. The reverberations from this exchange were instant and far-reaching. Within the space of an hour, professional journals and legal blogs were racing to dissect what had just occurred. Legal scholars across the nation were studying Crockett's arguments and discovering that they were legally accurate, historically correct, and clinically deadly. The Harvard Law Review Twitter account published a thread that deconstructed Crockett's constitutional claims. Every citation she used was verified as correct, every legal assertion she made was affirmed by legal professionals. The thread ended, "No matter institutional affiliations, this was constitutional advocacy at its best." And the twist, that thread was posted on legal websites, triggering discussions long silenced in elitist forums. But the seismic shift actually came from outside the elite institutions. A collection of law professors at schools such as UCLA, Duke, and NYU issued an open letter, "Legal Excellence Beyond the Ivy League." It wasn't merely a statement, but a call to arms. The legal establishment had been notified. The old guard no longer had a monopoly on intellectual capital. A new, more diverse era was due to dawn. Perhaps even more surprising was the political ripple effect. Democratic strategists saw Crockett's performance as a blueprint for how to challenge Republican claims of intellectual superiority. One senior Democratic operative speaking anonymously told Politico, "Jasmine just showed how to take down elitist condescension with facts and preparation. This is going to be studied in every political communications workshop." Republican pundits were, however, very quiet on the other side. A number of high-profile conservative legal commentators who might otherwise jump to Dershowitz's defense simply did not say anything about the exchange. Silence was loud and clear. Something had changed in the perception of authority and expertise. The Congressional Black Caucus released a statement in praise of Crockett's masterful display of legal acumen and principled representation. The statement recalled that her performance is characteristic of the level of intense preparation and constitutional understanding that Americans expect from their representatives. A moment of pride for the Congresswoman, but for the communities she serves as well. But the ripple effect didn't end there. The standoff started affecting law school applications soon after. The University of Houston Law Center, which is Crockett's alma mater, saw a 40% surge in website traffic in 24 hours. Potential students cited specifically the CNN segment in their queries. Non-elite law schools started receiving calls from potential students seeking information about constitutional law classes and hands-on legal training. The word was out, students didn't merely desire theoretical knowledge, and that they wanted to learn about law the way Crockett had learned it, with practical application and a dedication to principled advocacy. Even top law schools couldn't remain indifferent to the change. While most individual professors applauded Crockett's performance, the institutional reaction was multifaceted. Harvard Law School, in a diplomatically phrased statement, welcomed vigorous legal debate from all qualified sources, irrespective of institutional affiliation. But the statement made no point to defend Dershowitz or his remarks about regional law schools. Yale Law School's dean tweeted on LinkedIn, "Excellence in legal reasoning transcends institutional boundaries." And there it was. The world of academics had been irretrievably changed. Legal acumen, it was discovered, is not determined by where you attended school or the initials on your degree. It's determined by how you present the law and how well you question the established order. The letter, which was signed by more than 200 state school and regional school professors, contended that Crockett's performance proved the essential value of varied educational routes in producing effective legal advocates. This wasn't a victory for Crockett alone, it was a triumph for the future of legal education. Alan Dershowitz, on his side, sought damage control soon after. Hours after the CNN report, he wrote a blog entry entitled, "Defending Academic Standards in Legal Education." The entry countered that his remarks were misquoted and that he has the utmost regard for lawyers irrespective of their background. It was too late, though. His damage was done, and his attempt to take it back only made things worse. The blog entry turned into a smoking gun. Legal Twitter blew up with images of the blog entry side by side with video clips of his initial comments. Everyone could see that Dershowitz's attempt to cover his tracks wasn't merely unsuccessful, it was an effort to save what was left of his compromised reputation. And it wasn't going over well. Some of the media outlets contacted Dershowitz for follow-up interviews, but his representatives refused all the requests. The silence was deafening. It was as if the legal community was witnessing him slink away, trying to repair the harm Crockett had inflicted in that one fiery confrontation. Outside of political and legal circles, the encounter played into wider cultural discussions of expertise, authority, and respect in the United States. Professional women's organizations praised Crockett's acting as a model of how to counter condescending behavior in the workplace. The National Association of Women Lawyers posted, "Every woman who has ever been questioned about her qualifications instead of her arguments should watch this video." Civil rights groups interpreted the exchange as an affirmation of their diversity arguments in professional settings. The NAACP tweeted, "This is why representation matters. Different voices bring different strengths." And tonight, Jasmine Crockett had demonstrated the strength of that principle. This was no longer a legal argument, it was a movement. Legal education experts started anticipating that the exchange would leave a lasting impact on law school recruitment of students and promotion of programs. The old hierarchy of legal education, predicated on artificial scarcity and historical advantage, was collapsing. One legal education researcher stated, "What Crockett demonstrated is that practical legal training and real-world experience can be just as valuable as elite credentials." The stakes were evident. This wasn't merely about Crockett winning a debate. This was about altering the story of legal expertise permanently. A number of law schools, sensing the tide, made moves to highlight practical training programs and affiliations with working legal professionals over the mere academic status. The establishment had been warned. But above all, Crockett had forged a new model for pushing back against elitist condescension in public debates. Her strategy, Extensive preparation, clear legal reasoning, and assertive delivery would be modeled and imitated by advocates in many areas. Public speaking trainers started dissecting her style, while political communications professionals started to add her tactics to their instructional curriculum. Law professors were already using the exchange as the standard for successful legal advocacy. Back in Congress, Crockett's peers were taking notice. A few representatives from both sides of the aisle approached her privately to compliment her on her performance. More importantly, Democratic leadership was now eyeing her for more visible roles in legal and constitutional debate. House Judiciary Committee leadership allegedly started making plans to provide her with more visibility in questioning time in future hearings. The message was clear: underestimating Jasmine Crockett's legal acumen would be a mistake they wouldn't make again. Television news producers and directors from throughout the media spectrum were also paying close attention. Within a matter of days, several networks contacted Crockett's office asking for her availability to provide legal analysis and comment. The message was clear: the days of relying solely on elite academic qualifications were over. Audiences were demanding legal commentators who could bring both scholarly expertise and practical experience, along with principled advocacy. CNN itself started hosting more diverse legal commentators, including a number of lawyers from non-elite law schools who were able to bring real-world experience into their commentary. As the initial buzz started to fade, the long-term consequences of the exchange became clear as day. Jasmine Crockett had not simply won an argument. She had challenged some of the basic assumptions about authority, expertise, and respect in American professional life. Young attorneys from underrepresented groups gained new self-assurance in their skills and viewpoints. Law students at non-prestigious schools felt encouraged in their professional choices. Women and minorities working in the corporate world now had a new role model of how to deal with condescension with power and intelligence. The profession itself started a long overdue discussion about what defines and values expertise. The outdated assumptions of hierarchy and credentials were being challenged, and the profession would be the better for it. Above all, the exchange proved that in America's constant debates about law, politics, and justice, the most significant qualification isn't where you attended school or how your credentials read on paper. It's whether you can reason well, argue well, and defend principles that matter. Jasmine Crockett had established all of that, and a lot more, on national TV. And the world of law would never be the same. The showdown between Jasmine Crockett and Alan Dershowitz will be remembered as a defining moment in American legal and political debate. It was the end of an era in which elite credentials could silence different voices, and the start of a new era in which one is judged on performance, and not pedigree. For those who have seen this historic debate, the message is simple: never judge somebody by where they are from or where they graduated. Judge them on what they know, how they reason, and what they believe in. And if you picked up something from this amazing battle of wits, do not forget to subscribe to our channel and that notification bell. Because in American politics and law, there are always more battles to be fought, more truth to be revealed, and more moments when the underdog proves that merit matters more than privilege. If you've been inspired by Jasmine Crockett's unwavering courage and powerful challenge to the status quo, don't let this moment fade away. Subscribe now to be part of a movement that cares about actual expertise, actual justice, and the voices that are shattering glass ceilings. This battle for equity isn't done. There's more where that came from, and you're going to want to stay tuned. Tap that subscribe button, join the crew, and stay tuned for more moments when the underdog emerges to prove to the world that merit will always trump privilege.